So, how does one know if they are in a toxic work environment?
Yeah. Well, a toxic work environment is one where you're feeling mistreated. Very often a toxic work environment allows people to misbehave, some of your colleagues or maybe your boss. So if you have a bullying boss or coworkers who are allowed to sort of bully or um, push you, disparage you, or whatever. And there's no culture in that organization to kind of prevent that mistreatment of employees. Then it's a pretty good sign that's a toxic environment. And no one should have to deal with a toxic environment. And there are other opportunities out there. So, my advice is if you're in that kind of situation, you want to look to get out.
Yeah. So, what would you say is the big difference between being challenged versus being bullied? Because that can be a fine line, right?
Yeah, of course. I think when someone challenges you, so your supervisor, your leader, I'm a leadership scholar, so we always talk
Yeah.
about leadership. And leaders when they challenge, they should do it in a sort of supportive way, you know. So when I think about what leaders do, they delegate. They delegate responsibilities. They empower them and give them responsibilities. But it's really critical for the leader to not overtax the individual, to not push them so far that they're completely stressed. And that's really important for the leader and the follower, the leader and the employee to develop a good relationship so they understand one another. So a good leader should challenge you, but in a kind of a supportive way. They shouldn't berate you, punish you when you don't achieve goals. A- All the research in psychology says that positive reinforcement's much better than punishing people. You're going to motivate people if you encourage them. You're going to kill motivation by punishing people.
Got it. So, most of the time, I guess this is going to be specialized based on the person that you're working with, right? Because some people, they might need more of a challenge because sometimes if you give them too much positive reinforcement, they might get lazier, right? So, as a leader, how do you know when to push someone and when not to push someone?
Yeah. Well, the thing about motivation, and you mentioned, the sort of laziness, and one of the issues there is the person really lazy, or are they, they're unable to do their job, or there's something else going on. And again, it gets back to the supervisor, to the leader. They need to be in touch with the employee. They need to know kind of what's going on in their lives. They do have to develop a good relationship. So all the kind of concepts of leadership, theories of leadership that talk about what really is exemplary leadership um, emphasize quality relationships. So you should have a good relationship with your supervisor, and that supervisor should know how to motivate you. Um, sure, there's going to be employees who are, trying to just get by, go under the radar screen, just get a paycheck or whatever. But then that's the leader's responsibility to say, hey, you're not a good fit for our organization. You need to
Mhm.
be looking elsewhere. So I really do put this on the supervisor, to develop and to nurture employees, to motivate them, to understand when you're going to overload somebody because you don't want to overload people.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now would you mind if you quickly go through like the different types of harassment and, like bullying and abuse that people should look for in a work environment? Because I know in your article you mentioned like sexual abuse, verbal, and so on and so forth. So yeah, well, if you can just go through a few of those types, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, anything that makes you, feel uncomfortable. So obviously, sexual harassment, that's completely out of bounds. That's a good reason to go to HR to really consider leaving a job, finding a better environment. Sometimes, and overt bullying where somebody, gets in your face and is constantly ragging on you,
Mhm.
that's the kind of situation that you definitely got to get out of. But I think you also need to look for the more subtle kinds of bullying that occurs, or people leaving you out of work related conversations, purposely doing that and doing that consistently, marginalizing you, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, on the other side, some employees do isolate themselves, but again, it comes back to the leaders in the organization to try to draw those people out.
Got it. Okay, so I guess it just comes down to basically, stuff that makes you feel like it's a bit too much. When you start feeling pretty uncomfortable, that's when you know there's a line, right? And oftentimes it's going to come in the form of sexual, verbal, and being excluded
Yeah.
by people in your work environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Just general mistreatment. One of the things, if you think about stress, we always think of stress as being sort of negative. And there is a positive aspect to stress. Stress, think of it as challenge. I've got this deadline, I've got this big project, but I'm motivated to do this. And I know I've got to work overtime. I know I'm going to be stressed, challenged. When the stress becomes a kind of a negative thing, when it's interpersonal, these people are making my life miserable, that's the time where you say, hey, this is a really bad environment to be in.
Got it. Okay, so if people, do find out that they are in a toxic environment, what are the best ways to approach that situation, just in your experience?
Well, obviously you don't want it to escalate. So in the best way is early on to try to put a stop to it. It's very difficult to stand up to somebody who's bullying you,
Hmm.
particularly if it's your boss, right? Because they have a lot of power. But you should, if your HR department is supportive, is a good one, then you can turn to HR. But the thing is to not let it escalate, not let it get to a stage where it's so negative that there's no alternative but to leave the organization. So you want to kind of like nip it in the bud, get to it as early as possible. But the other thing is if you're in that environment and it's really bad and it's continuous, that's the time to look for another job.
Got it. Yeah. So it comes down to HR looking for a new job. And you mentioned stop it early on,
Yeah.
right? So what would be the way to do that? Like, do you just go and talk to the person, or like, how would you help a person, stop it early on?
Yeah, I think you have to be tactful. So if it's a coworker, approach them, and it takes courage, right? And say, look, what's going on, and try to reason with them. If they refuse to interact with you, or they continue that, then you go to the supervisor, or you go to HR. If the supervisor doesn't provide support, that's a real good warning sign that things aren't going to get better.
Hmm.
um, because it's your supervisor's job to care for you, to make sure that you are able to do the work that you're there to do, to facilitate your work. And so if someone is harassing you and you can't do your job, then the leader needs to be just as concerned as you are about that.
Got it. Okay. So I guess, you mentioned, speak with a supportive, like coworker of yours, or try and speak to that supervisor itself. And if it's not going anywhere, then you have to go to HR and kind of go from there, and
Yeah,
even leave the job if need be.
you got to take some action. I mean, if you
Yeah. Yeah.
the problem is people, it's hard to do it. It takes courage, as I said, to confront somebody, but you have to do it for your own good. The downside would be, you endure it, you go home, you complain to your significant other, or your friends. That's not going to solve the problem. That
Yeah.
is, you're going to go back into that toxic environment.
Got it.